Greetings and welcome to the McAfee Roundtable, your favorite podcast to be joined by your favorite faculty, staff, students, deans, theologians. Oh my, we all come together to talk all things ministry, all things theology, all things pop culture too. Whatever is happening in your world, trust is happening in God's world, and we're going to talk about it. Today we're joined by Dr. Greg DeLoach, the Dean of McAfee School of Theology, and Dr. David Garber, and we're going to talk why seminary. Word on the street is that some of you all have discerned a call to ministry and you went to talk to your pastor about it, and he or she said you need to go to seminary. So, Dean, I'm going to kick it to you first. Why do they need to go to seminary? TikTok doesn't do it?
Well, first I want to clarify my favorite. You weren't specific enough, but that's okay. I'll take it. And yeah, that's also a good question. Is TikTok, YouTube, or any number of ways that people can just sort of do it DIY theological education. And the truth is a lot more complicated than that. I think that seminary is a place where formation takes place as well as information. So there's something collaborative about being with others, those that have spent a lifetime in scholarship and expertise, studying a particular area. It could be biblical language, like with Dr. Garber, and Old Testament theology. It could be practical ministries with some of our other faculty members. But again, it's not just about the transaction of information and knowledge, but it's about the formation of being together, the collective wisdom, if you will, of both student and teacher, and in the sharing of stories. So it's to me very critical to be a part of that dynamic process that doesn't have its start in seminary, and neither does it have its finish in seminary, but seminary itself is a vital conduit in that in that process.
Dr. Garber, what say you?
So when I was discerning a call to seminary and to ministry, I kept hearing about the onslaught of the information age, right? And we've all lived through the growth of the internet and the growth of social media and all of that. And now we're in kind of the onslaught of the misinformation age. And one of the, I think, key reasons one needs to go to seminary right now is to develop those critical thinking skills to navigate this misinformation age. Because if we trust in our Google searches or our YouTube searches or whatever, the internet has given a megaphone to anyone, right? And so how do we discern what interpretations are valid? How do we discern what interpretations are meaningful for our own communities? How do we think through our own context and the context that we grew up in, and whether or not that matches another person's context? All of that kind of shaping takes place in seminary, where you are with people who come from different backgrounds, different theological leanings, different perspectives, and you get into this room and you have deep conversations and transformative conversations that help you see things in new lights.
Okay. So you're about to say something?
Well, I was. I'm also
it.
thinking, just to plow for Dr. Garber for a moment, there's something also very important happening in the classroom context when we imperceptibly, or sometimes perceptibly, bring our biases into the room, and it can be called into check. And so if you're trying to do it yourself, so to speak, in terms of theological education, it's really hard to have someone check you on that. Not that necessarily you're wrong, but that there may be other ways of looking at this. And sometimes faculty members help do that. But I find oftentimes it's also happening in the classroom because a person's lived experience can't be denied. So if you're bringing that into that space, it compels us to take this information and figure out how we're going to learn in light of that. And so again, the DIY approach is just going to fall woefully short. It's just simply going to reinforce one's biases in a way that can be not only disinformation but destructive, I think. So yeah.
So where do I start? Like who can even go to seminary? How old do I need to be? What type of background, education do I need to have to even be teed up for this to be a possibility for me? Can I go right from high school to seminary, or?
Yeah, no, but that's a really good question, because I do think it's anytime someone's exploring something, especially as precious as a calling, it can be very overwhelming. Well, yes, at McAfee School of Theology at Mercer University, you do have to have an undergraduate degree, a bachelor's degree. And I think that it's its own thing. Back when I was preparing for seminary, the BA or Bachelor of Arts was preferred, and even having a Bachelor of Arts in Religious Studies seemed to be the bias, if you will, of what people were recommending. But today we see students coming from all walks. We have PhDs in organic chemistry. We have BAs in interior design. We have BSs in pharmacology and things like that. So it's all over the map, but having a bachelor's degree is, of course, the starting point. And whether or not one has had religious studies or not is less important, because part of the process of theological education is giving those tools and a way of learning and growing in your educational experience. I came to seminary with an art background. In many ways, one could say I wasn't prepared, but on the other hand, I had a liberal arts background, which helped me bring the demands of reading and writing into the classroom, and so that was less of a learning curve for me. But Dr. Garber, what do you think? You too have experience.
Well, I came from that traditional Bachelor of Arts and Religion route, but after having so many students who have engineering degrees or business degrees or interior design or whatever degree they have, what is more critical is an openness that when you come to the classroom. And what I found for some of those people who don't have the religious studies background is they often ask some of the more interesting questions because they have that kind of blank slate. And it's kind of a tension in the classroom sometimes when you have some people who have been through some of that kind of initial, this is what biblical scholars say about the origins of Scripture. They've had that in undergraduate. And then some of the students have never had that exposure. And so there's some tension in that. And sometimes when it gets played out in a healthy way, the people who've had the religious studies backgrounds can help out some of those who have not. And those who have not had the religious studies background can bring in some really new and eye-opening questions to the conversation.
Yeah, I think that's really compelling too, because you're right. The lived experience or the academic experience of different degrees does sometimes bring a freshness of, well, why is that? Whereas a more formally trained religion major may take for granted the things because they learned it at formative times in their lives. Leah, I do want to return back to something you were asking in addition to degrees. That is age. And so, yes, if you are going straight through from college to seminary, that would put you at about 22 or so years old. But today's classroom is populated by 22-year-olds to persons well into their 70s who are not even their second career, encore career. And so that, too, is an interesting dynamic when you have someone that may have spent 40 years doing one thing and now, thinking about, I'm going to do something different. And they bring that just as much as the 22-year-old who is bringing the earnestness of attending to their own still small voice being spoken into their life. Again, these dynamic interactions, I think, are really, really incredible.
Yeah. One of the things that I thought about as that question came to me is a personal situation that I have going on, but also one of a friend. I have a friend who's mentoring a junior in high school, right? And so how does she get him ready for seminary? And then I have a mentee who's a junior in college. Right. And so if they accept, hey, this is the trajectory, I need to go to seminary, but it's not quite time for me to apply. How do we help them be ready to take that step so they show up in the classroom in the ways that you mentioned? You know what I mean? That they bring the best foot forward and are the most open for the seminary experience. How can we help them prepare?
I think one of the things you might want to really encourage is that education, the pure humanities kind of education, reading and writing skills, and comprehensive, reading comprehension skills. Those kinds of things are key, whether you do that in a philosophy class, in a political science class, in art history class. Honing some of those skills will give you an advantage when you get to seminary, so that you can communicate well. Because when it comes down to it, whether you're preaching or whether you're counseling or whether you're a youth minister, communication is at the center of all of that, right? And so anything that will help prepare them to be good communicators, but also good listeners, I think will help kind of pave the road for seminary.
Yeah, that's absolutely critical. And probably in a less specific way, there's something that you just mentioned a moment ago, Leah, is what's really needed is a community of mentors of sorts. And so, and I actually think that's kind of probably something that's missing, which sometimes that does show up in the classroom. And of course, a student can't do anything about the community they come from, but it is an important for us, all of us, to kind of remind ourselves about, we're helping form people at a very early age. I mean, I even question, been a pastor for something like 30 years, and I don't know if I did enough work in saying, hey, maybe a calling into ministry is an option for you, a question you ought to be asking of yourself, in as much as any student is thinking, well, do I want to be a pharmacist? Do I want to be a doctor? Do I want to be a lawyer? You know, they're thinking the practical things. What do you want to do with your life? I wonder if we're not asking that question enough about, well, maybe God is summoning something within you that is about meaning making, and so what is it in, whether it's church or a nonprofit, what communities in your life are helping shape and prepare you? Because it's also a struggle when a student comes here and they are lacking community, and then some people are coming from church hurt. And so there's a little bit of a reaction going on there, and so that is its own kind of deconstructive work. But you need something constructive, too, to help you along the way. If not, I think in seminary we're helping try to provide those ways of providing communities support, mentorship, relationships, things of that nature.
Flesh and blood did not reveal that to you, because I was just about to ask. As a pastor, looking back, right, hindsight is more than 20/20. With these glasses, it's more than 20/20, I promise. But, looking back at little Leah, and I wonder, right, I got involved in ministry very young. Like, I was saved one Sunday in the choir and in dance ministry the next. What are some things that maybe my pastor could have, would have, should have been able to help me sort through a little earlier? Looking back, I'm like, yeah, girl, you was called. You should have known, right? But what are some things that you would tell pastors, if they have people who they sense either the gifts and graces, or who have articulated in childhood, an affinity for God and the things of God, and you, Dr. Garber, too, as well, with the Word of God, which we'll sort through that on another episode. What really is the Word of God? He'll be back to talk about that. But just what are some things that pastors advice you'd give them?
Yeah, if I could go back to my earlier self, I would take a lot more initiative. I'm even embarrassed to admit this, but I think early on I just assumed that a person's calling narrative would be a lot like mine, and that is, you kind of wake up one day and think, yeah, I believe I'm being called into ministry. Now, of course, it wasn't that simple with me. I had churches. I mean, I went to a little country church, and at a young age, we were part of the ushers, and I always thought that was a big deal when I got to hand out the offering plate. And I felt treated kind of respectfully, not for any other reason, and that's just church was a place of belonging there. But I do remember as a teenager, it was something with our youth group, but an older adult said, I think you might be called to preach. And I thought she was being ridiculous. And I went on to art school anyway, right? But that wondering was kind of haunting, and I had to circle back with that in time. If I could go back in time, I would like to have shown more initiative with others. And instead of waiting for them to come to me, I wish I would have taken more time to go to persons that I thought have demonstrated some qualities into ministry, a sense of wonderment. And there are young people that you just see it in them. They're curious. They're intellectually curious, or they have this mystical wonderment, and you're seeing things in them. And to spend more time for them to think about this as a viable alternative. I'm curious, Dr. Garber, what are your thoughts with that?
Well, sometimes you learn by negative examples.
Yeah.
What not to do.
Yeah, I'm thinking about when I was exploring, first doing a religion major in college and then doing seminary. I had one pastor say, "Now, don't go to that school and let them steal your faith." And that was when I went to college, and then the next transition. When I graduated from college, I hadn't lost my faith, but it had certainly changed. When I graduated from college, we had a kind of a dedication Sunday for the graduates at the church. It was a university church, and another old pastor came up and whispered in my ear, "Now, when you go to that seminary, don't let them steal your faith." And I was always puzzled by that when I first heard it, and then when I got to seminary or when I got to undergraduate, and people were giving me, they weren't stealing my faith, but they were giving me different options for how to express my faith or how to think about my faith. And so I always go back to that, and I hope that pastors now will say to the people that they're mentoring, seminary is going to challenge you. Studying theology is going to challenge you, and your faith will be changed. Your faith will be transformed. And if it's not, then that I would say that seminary is doing something wrong. But it's not trying to steal your faith. It's trying to enhance, give you tools, help you think deeper about your faith.
So let me ask you, you said something that triggered something in me. How do we prepare emotionally to be ready to take that step in the journey, right? To have our faith challenged, to have everything that we've known deconstructed. What are some things that, someone who is getting ready for seminary can do to shore themselves up emotionally for that journey?
I think one of the things that the dean said earlier is just having a community, not just of mentors, but a community that has your back, a community of people that you can go to and say, "Hey, this is what I'm experiencing, and this is what I'm feeling. This is how I'm understanding God differently, having taken these classes, or I'm understanding the Bible differently, having taken these classes, and have that community there for you, listen to you, tell them that you need them to listen, and not really just necessarily give you all the advice, or say, "Oh, well, you just don't need to think about that stuff at seminary. You just, but not only that, but also have the discipline to continue with your faith practices. One of the things I always talk about in my introduction to Old Testament class is you're studying the Bible from an academic perspective, from a scholarly perspective, but your intellectual pursuits are also spiritual pursuits, right? You're sharpening your mind. You're loving God with your mind, as Jesus taught us. And that, thinking of your studies as a spiritual discipline in itself is another helpful thing. The last thing I would add to that is one of the great things about seminary is in the best of circumstances, you'll find other people who are like you and who are unlike you, who are going through the same kinds of transformations that you're going through while your co-students, your peers, and those relationships that you form could be lifelong relationships that will give you support as you continue in your work of ministry, wherever that leads you. And so figuring out a way to build that network of people, whether it's people online that you only know online, or whether it's people in a physical classroom, that I think is really important as you start to prepare for seminary and enter into seminary.
Yeah, and I'm thinking about your question about emotional support, because going back to how do we nurture, or how can potential students be nurtured into this coming to seminary, and some, because of gender, race, sexual orientation, may have heard from the church, no. Reverend Leah Jackson, and so I'm not saying you did hear no, but
if the shoe fits,
but
no.
they
somebody said no, not my pastor, but somebody did.
But they come here and then realize, there are people like me, which may be a gendered comment, or a racial comment, or a sexual orientation comment. There are people like me, and it's validating that notion. And I'm going to use the word call, although not every student uses the word call, but. And so in some cases, the community is precisely by showing up here and saying, okay, we need to figure out how we can find a place where my voice can be validated and heard even beyond the classroom. Otherwise, it's just one more exercise in imposter syndrome. So, for example, with the Reimagining grant that we're working with, as you know very well, creating this space for Black women was critical, because otherwise it was hard for them to find themselves reflected in supportive environments, and having no idea of what churches they've come from and so forth. But coming here to continue to nurture the calling, nurture this sense of validation. I do belong here. I'm answering something that's deep and ancient and rich, and help being prepared, informed with that. So yeah, it just popped in my head when you said that. I thought, yeah, a lot of people don't, for a number of reasons, aren't prepared for theological education because they come from communities and environments that have not supported or validated their own preparation.
So how do we sort through all of we're in Atlanta, so, there's lots of theological schools here. How do we sort through all the different schools? My pastor went to this place. Mm-hmm. My pastor's best friend went to this place. I heard that this famous preacher went to this school. Like, how do I figure out what school is right for me?
I think the biggest thing to do is visit. Mm-hmm. Visit every school you're interested in. See what the vibe is, see whether you fit into that vibe. By visiting, by attending a class, you can get to see what the relationship between the professors and the students are, whether that's that's the type of relationship you want, or you'll get to see whether there's camaraderie between the students in the classroom. I think the visits are essential. Mm-hmm. And if you're thinking about doing this online, you can still visit a Zoom class and get a feel for how those online courses are taught. Mm-hmm. But the more you expose yourself to actual people, whether that's virtually or in person, the more you'll get a feel for the vibe and the fit. Mm-hmm. I think.
Dean.
Yeah. I mean, of course, I'm tempted to say, well, really, we're the only one you need to be considering.
Okay, I was going there. No, listen, I was going to ask you a different question. I was going to say, well, what's the secret sauce here at McAfee? Like, why McAfee?
Right.
That's literally where I was coming. So go ahead and jump in the water.
And it's very fair, because I think if you're a potential student, you're going to want to know, well, all right, what does make you unique? Not trying to sound politically correct, all the schools are offering great things. There's no question about that. There's great scholars that are teaching in all of the schools. But I think that McAfee's secret sauce is accessibility. And what I mean by that is, if a potential student is visiting a class either by Zoom or in person, they have access to our professors, and for that matter, our staff and supportive individuals, in an embedded university in a way that I think really does bridge that gap. So if you're the extrovert and you're really needing some attention with different scholars and different subject matters, and are endlessly curious and exploring these places, this is a great place to exercise that. If you are an introvert and prefer not to be necessarily on center stage, but nevertheless quietly wondering and nurturing, once again, I think McAfee is able to offer some good, strong access. We're in each other's space a lot. None of the faculty are siloed off from one another or the school itself that they're necessarily irrelevant because of their particular discipline or subject matter. They're experts in their fields, to be sure, but they're also very generalist in terms of how can we help you become the best you, that is theologically formed and informed, so that when the day comes you leave this place, that stole that has marked you at the beginning and the chalice and paten that is presented to you as you exit here, that you are prepared and formed for the world that's waiting on your voice and your action. So I really do believe that that's one of the strong points of McAfee. We have great scholarship, but it's accessible, and we meet students where they are. Also demanding that we don't stay where they are. None of us needs to stay where we are, but rather in that fluid motion of going forward.
Now, Dr. Garber, you mentioned the potential for online learning. Talk to us a little bit about, McAfee's online educational program. Hint, knock, knock, right? But, I know many people may think that you can't get a meaningful theological education online, but I think McAfee's doing it well. So how are we doing that?
Well, so one of the other hats I wear is the director of distance learning here. And so I'm very invested in our online programs. And for a long time in theological education, there was a lot of pushback against online education. And we struggled with it as a faculty. Should we offer things online? Can we offer the same kind of education online that we offer in person? Really, it was moving through the COVID world and everybody having to go online to do their classes that I think really convinced us, hey, we can do this. We have the gifts, and the technology is now available. So early on in the pushes for online education, the technology wasn't great, right? But with Zoom and other kinds of platforms, we're able to have good interaction with students that emulates what we would do in face-to-face groups. We can put people into breakout rooms that emulates what we would do if we're doing group work in the classroom. And there are lots of things that we can do. We can even, for some of the introverts who don't like to speak up in class, some people use the chat feature, and they can put their questions and comments and hopefully not so snide remarks in the chat feature, and we can get back to them. So we learned through that experience how to do online education, and what we found is that for a lot of people who are coming to the online programs, they're already working in churches. Mm-hmm. Many of them are already working in churches, and the only way they could have a seminary degree is to do an online program. And that also kind of solves one of the things that we talked about earlier, is this faith background, this faith support network. They're in a church. Mm-hmm. They're embedded doing the work while they're learning. They're in a laboratory already. And so I think that's one of the things that we were able in the past 4 or 5 years to really cultivate, is this sense of, yes, you are a part of the McAfee School of Theology. And we have a lot of students who are residential now who will take online classes, and that cross-pollination is really helpful. And so we just had graduation a couple weeks ago, and to see people who had only been on Zoom calls with each other, and to see their camaraderie and their smiles and their hugs and the community that they built there at the graduation service, I think is a testimony to what we're doing.
See, now you're prophetic, because I was just about to ask you, like, what are we doing to build community with our online students and for them to feel a part of the body?
Yeah, I think a lot of that community is built within the classroom. Nice. Right? So whether it's professors who take time to kind of ask for prayer requests, or have often in some of my classes, I'll have a community prayer request board in the discussion board where people can share what's going on in their lives and say, I need prayer for this, this, and this, because once you enter seminary, life doesn't stop, right? And so people go through illnesses, people go through deaths in their families, people go through all sorts of life changes, and that offers a place of community for them. I think also, even though I just said the positive of many people being embedded in churches is that they have that community background, sometimes you need to have a community outside that church where you can say, hey, these are things I'm struggling with in my community context. And you can bounce that off of people. And that happens in classes, and that happens through these kinds of boards, and that happens as people communicate with each other through email or chat or by phone even.
I'd like to add it also goes back to the earlier comment of the accessibility. So online offers an interesting and unique accessibility. And so some things that professors do, and I do this in my classes, is I log on earlier intentionally. And so it becomes kind of its own visiting. And so, hey, it's good to see you, Milton, and how are things going over there in Birmingham, or the chit-chat, actually what you just said, normal conversations that people actually have. It just happens to be on a Zoom platform or other. I also think it's we do a few other things as well. We have a midweek time of prayer that's just a brief 5 minutes. We have a lot of students that use that. It also bridges the gap in terms of distance. And so back to what Dr. Garber spoke of, they're oftentimes serving in churches, and so they do have a formal community, so to speak. But the online gives them permission to say, we're going through a tough time in my congregation, or our pastors. Sometimes it's things like my pastor's spouse is not doing well, or my pastor's not doing well, or we've had this rupture in the congregation, and that's actually real life problems. And so it's understandable that that becomes safe space to do that. I was a skeptic. I think everybody's a little bit skeptical, but at the end of the day, if we live and I not necessarily like this word, but if we live in a virtual world, which we do, online education is just one more way of needing to be relevant to the world we're preparing our students to serve. They've got to have some experience in this, and classroom is one of the ways they get that experience.
And I was one of those students fortunate to be serving in my church context while in seminary and working full-time. I don't know if that was fortunate or not. But what are some things that, people should expect or from their churches while they're in seminary? What does that relationship look like with your congregation, whether, you're a volunteer or you're on staff and you're changing, but they're not in the classroom with you? Like, how do you navigate that?
That's good. I'm kind of laughing because I think one of the things that students often do is, let's just say, and I'll use this as an anecdote, they're invited to come preach, and they want to unload everything in that congregation, and it could be anything from ethical issues or big fancy biblical words that they learned in Dr. Garber's class that really nobody in the pew necessarily cares about, but it starts zooming over their head. However, healthy congregations too should be better prepared to foster these opportunities for sharing what's going on and learning and discovering together. Congregations can do a better job in embracing their role as a teaching church, which is a way to say this is the field or one of the fields in which you may be called to serve. It's a little more complicated with nonprofits because that's very specific. But those are just a few. I think you're about to jump in and say something, Dr. Garber.
No, I recognize the danger in that. Sometimes, or I'd say 20 years ago, we would talk to young students who are going to go out into ministry after they graduate, and we would say, now you don't want to bring all of what you learned in Old Testament 101 on your first day to your Sunday school assignment, right? You'll just you went through a journey, you went through a process. If you're going to lead someone else through that process, you have to start with where they are. You have to analyze your context. So my advice is less for the churches and congregations and what they want to do, but more for the students. You need to analyze, is your context ready to handle some of these things?
Right.
And it's not intellectually dishonest to say, well, you know what? I'm not going to talk about the composition history of Genesis with my middle school Bible study.
They don't need to know about the JEDP theory?
I was on there.
I mean, they can, and some churches have prepared young adults to,
but maybe
to
not
do that.
Every church,
but, yeah, but not every church. You have to, and that's, I think, one of the other essentials of seminary is we're not just learning about content. We're learning how to evaluate context, right?
Yeah.
So, and it's not just, it's context from all different angles. It's your own social context, where you grew up, what your economic status was growing up, whether you lived in a rural setting or an urban setting or a suburban setting, right? All of those things about social location, race, ethnicity, national status, all of those things form who you are. And so you have to evaluate your own context, and you spend a lot of that first year in seminary in spiritual formation, in classes like biblical studies, evaluating your own context and figuring out how it affects the way that you interpret. But then you move on to start thinking about, okay, I've got to evaluate the context of the biblical texts. When were they written? What political dynamics were going on when those texts were written? Who were they talking to? Who were they trying to convince? What were they trying to convince that audience of? Like, it's all about that social context of the ancient world. But then when you think about congregational ministry, where does this congregation sit? In what community? What is the community going through? What are their troubles? What are their privileges? What do they have? What resources do they have access to? What's their history?
I think one of the things McAfee does really well in that area is that I think it does a great job at reinforcing those questions of context. Not because it's not one course; it's really many. I would say most of the classes deal on some level of the context question, and the other would be what comes to mind is better education in emotional intelligence, self-awareness, things like that. And so that's its own kind of contextual reflection, right? Who am I, or where am I sitting in this situation? So that the idea is that when you leave here, it's not so much that you have the answers of where you're going. You just have a better set of questions to be asking and to serve well. But but it does require. I think it requires a little bit of poetry. I mean, it's not so much about the science of where you're going and what you need to do, but how do you interpret and read in a way that can be both prophetic, because we need prophetic voices, but also pastoral, because we also need pastoral voices, and they're not mutually exclusive. Rather, they're held together.
So what do you say to a person who's hearing all of this and say, you know what, I can't do this. I'm not smart enough. I'm not polished enough. I'm not refined enough. I can't do that seminary thing. What do you say to them?
Well, I mean, I think almost every student that come here is dealing with those kind of questions. And like any classroom setting, sure, you walk into that space, and there are some really bright, incredible people here, and there are folks that have just had a really difficult time. One of the things that's kind of important is that communication between the student and the professor to say, here's some things that I'm really intimidated by. And I'm just going to let you know that I feel like I'm going to struggle here. I think about Dr. Angela Parker in teaching Greek because as often the language is, Dr. Garber, whether it's Hebrew or Greek, that really intimidates potential students. Like, hey, I'm all about Jesus, but I don't know if I want to learn a foreign language, at this stage in my journey. And Dr. Parker shares her own story about Greek was a real struggle for her, according to her telling of it. And here she is now a PhD in this and teaching it. So she immediately empathizes with the student and is able to bring in, I think, better pedagogy to help that student in a individualized, customizable way, so to speak, and helping them overcome their fears. And I think quickly, too, we try to look and see where are the struggles that a student might have. It could be writing skills, and that's real. That's real. You're going to do a lot of writing in the School of Theology. Reading and comprehension, those are very real. So starting early on by not trying to convince us that you're all that, but maybe being more honest and saying, here's some things that are intimidating to me. What resources does the School of Theology or the university provide to help me be a successful student here?
Dr. Garber?
Yeah, so not to get too into my own biblical weeds about this, but I would think I would open up Exodus 3 and 4 and show
I love that.
Moses and his imposter syndrome when God says, go do this. I would look at Jeremiah and look at Jeremiah's imposter syndrome. I would look at texts like the text of Hagar and the questions that she brought and the difficulties that she brought, and yet God visited her. And I would just say, hey, look, the world is full, the Bible is full of people who had this kind of imposter syndrome. And yet God used them, and God continues to use them. And honestly, in academia, I can point out 3 or 4 people who have imposter syndrome everywhere you go. And so we all struggle with that. And again, if you're asking what advice I would give to congregations or support networks, I would say when you see your seminary student doing something really special, encourage them. Mm-hmm. Say, that's why God is calling you, right? Because it's that encouragement that will propel someone forward when they hit a wall. They can go back and say, oh yeah, that professor wrote this on my paper, or that minister saw something in me and encouraged me. Maybe I should keep going.
Mm.
Thank you for joining us for the McAfee Roundtable. We had a great time with Dean DeLoach and Dr. Garber. We'll be back here again, so stay tuned for the next episode, where we talk all things seminary, all things theology, all things culture, all things God, all things you. We invite you to check us out. We'd love to have you here at McAfee. I'm sure you'll find that this place will be a great home for you. Until next time.